Yes, thank you, Mayor. I'll be presenting this item tonight, and this item is on the agenda to inform the council and the public about the CASA Compact, which is a 15-year policy package to deal with the housing crisis. It's been developed by the Metropolitan Transportation Commission and the Association of Bay Area Governments via a stakeholder committee. Thank you. And in order to actually have any of these things take effect, they would really need the state legislature to change the laws in the state of California, and that's essentially what this policy package is proposing, is that the legislators in Sacramento would enact new laws that would affect cities and housing in the Bay Area, focused on the Bay Area. So I'm going to run through there's 10 elements to this policy package. I'm going to just go through them with the council. The first one is called Just Cause Eviction Policy, and it would divide every eviction of any tenant into an at-fault eviction or a no-fault eviction. And an example of a no-fault eviction would be the owner of the property wants to move into the property and occupy it themselves, and we saw a lot of that after the fires, for instance. People moved into their second home if their home burned down. And then an at-fault eviction would be if someone's not paying the rent, as an example. It requires certain noticing from the landlords, and it would give the tenants a cure period if it was an at-fault eviction. And then if it's a no-fault eviction, for instance, if the landlord's home burned down, they want to move into their second unit or their second home, then they would pay relocation assistance to the tenant. So they would pay rent for the tenant in a new place under this proposal. Element number 2, there would be essentially a cap on the rent increases each year. This would go for a 15-year period, and there would be an annual max increase on rents of the cost of the consumer price index change plus 5%. It would apply to the renter and not the unit. So if a renter moves out, then the rent for that unit could be reset and it wouldn't be subject to that cap. Element number 3, I'm off on my thing here. Thank you. Element number 3 would provide emergency rent assistance to low-income people that, for instance, an example might be the government shutdown. If you had someone who was on a low income and they're not getting their payment, it's an emergency, they can't pay their rent, this would step in and pay people's rent for them. And then it would provide legal counsel to all tenants facing any eviction. So it would provide lawyers for tenants to sue or defend themselves against landlords. Element number 4, remove second unit regulations, and it would remove local city jurisdiction and regulation over second dwelling units, also known as accessory dwelling units. It would allow multiple accessory dwelling units in multifamily homes, and I think, and I don't know, but I think what is meant here by a multifamily home would be like in San Francisco, where you have, family on one floor, family on a second floor, family on a third floor. They could then subdivide each of those floors into a second unit is kind of the idea there. And it would create a small homes building code. Right now, these tiny homes are really not fitting into any good regulatory scheme that the state has. The state has a code for mobile homes, it has a code for recreational vehicles, and it has a code for sort of regular houses. And the tiny homes are trying to sort of meet the requirements of being trailers, so they're putting them on wheels, but really there needs to be a code for small homes, and so this would ask the state, will you please develop a building code for small? Element number 5, this would establish minimum zoning near transit, so it would override any local zoning, and it would have a height of 55 to 75 feet around train stations, so that's like 5 to 7 stories more or less around train stations, and then 36-foot height near any high quality bus, which they define as 15 to 30 minute headways between buses. Element number 6 This would reform local government's approval process of housing. It places a number of restrictions on how cities process applications, adds a number of reporting requirements on cities, limits the number of public hearings that you can have on a project, and it changes how we set impact fees. And I'll just analyze this one a little bit. For us, our concern on this one is this would pull our staff off of building housing to do report writing, making lists, changing our impact fees. It would actually stall, I think, a little bit the production of housing that we're having, the success that we're having in Rohnert Park, if these things were handed down from the state as new requirements on us in particular. Element number 7, this would expedite the approvals and provide incentives for certain projects. It seeks exemptions from California Environmental Quality Act for certain projects. It would override and reduce for local requirements. For example, it cuts any local jurisdiction's parking requirement in half for certain projects. And then it would provide tax breaks for those certain projects. Element number 8, it is talking about using public land that's owned by public agencies for housing. And they're asking for the definitions of surplus and underutilized land to be redefined, and then changing the requirements on how that land is disposed of. It would require all cities and counties to make a list of all of their properties and then submit that to the state. It says that the state housing department can refer cities to the Attorney General for enforcement of making these lists and disposing of this property. And then it would blanket zone all underutilized properties as being housing. Element number 9 is the funding and financing, and there's 2 parts to this. One is they want to raise $1.5 billion a year, and I'll tell you how they want to do that. The other part of it is they're seeking about $1 billion from state and federal sources. They're proposing 8 different new taxes, and the proposal is not all 8 of them would be implemented, but some combination of 8 of them to get to $1.5 billion. And those taxes include a quarter-cent sales tax, a tax on vacant homes. So if you did own a second home and you didn't occupy it, there would be a tax on any new commercial development, a affordable housing linkage fee, and they're proposing in the $20 range per square foot. For instance, Rohnert Park is more in like the $2 a square foot. It'd be 10 times as much. A tax on any business's gross receipts. So any business in the Bay Area take their gross receipts, and then they would charge them.
Does it get worse? Keep going.
I think it's 0.75% on their revenues. It would charge a per employee. So any employer would have to pay, I think it's around maybe $48 per job. And then it proposes general obligation bonds, which typically are a property tax. It also proposes to take redevelopment money from cities. So for Rohnert Park, I estimate it would be about $200,000 a year from the city, and then about $15 million a year in taxes from Rohnert Park businesses and residents. Element number 10 would create a regional housing entity to do all of the things that are described in the other elements, and report progress, manage the legal assistance, and they say that this new entity would be non-regulatory. The CASA Compact, in addition to the 10 elements, has a number of calls for action, and those are reestablishing redevelopment, lowering the voter threshold for taxes related to housing measures. So right now the threshold for special taxes, in other words, taxes that specify how the money will be used, the voter threshold for that is a 2/3 vote. What they're proposing, and there's actually ACA 1 is in the legislature right now, would lower the threshold for infrastructure and housing taxes to be 55%, like it is for school districts. It would reform online sales tax to be the point of sale instead of the point of distribution. So currently, if someone buys something on, let's say, what's a good example? Online for Best Buy or something. Their distribution center is in Dinuba. They would get potentially the sales tax from that purchase versus Rohnert Park getting the sales tax from that if it's delivered to Rohnert Park. This is calling for that to be reformed. I think in general, because Rohnert Park doesn't have distribution centers for online purchases and sales, this would benefit the city. And they propose to reform Prop 13 to provide more money to cities that are creating housing, and that would tend to benefit, I think, bigger jurisdictions just because there's more number of units in those jurisdictions. But it's unknown how that would actually work. And then provide this program, this $2.5 billion is not directly focused on preventing or avoiding homelessness, although it may have that benefit if, for instance, rental assistance could keep people in their units and keep them from being evicted, and they may keep them from going into homelessness. But so separately, they have a call for action for the state that the state really needs to do more for funding housing for people who are moving out of homelessness. And then probably the recommendation in here that really actually maybe the most significant and the most important, but the hardest to do, is grow and stabilize the construction labor force. What we're seeing is just there's a lack of construction trades, especially in the specialties. The home building that's going on in Rohnert Park, a lot of them are coming from the Central Valley. There's just not enough skilled people working in construction trades for all the demand that there is right now. And so it's driving up the cost of construction of homes. So that is the informational report on the CASA Compact. This is, my understanding, is going to be voted on by the Association of Bay Area Governments Executive Committee later this month. And then I'm not sure when the vote would be at MTC, if it's even going to the full MTC board, but I think we have a MTC member that could probably enlighten us. Thank you.
All right.